Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Todd and Shane's Cloudy Podcast number 401, recorded live September 12th, 2018. As you can see, it is only me this week. There is no Shane. Shane is taking a much undeserved, much unneeded vacation. Alas, he's out gallivanting somewhere on a beach with his family. Apparently, they like hanging out with him and made him go along on their vacation. So you just get me this week. I did get the memo. I wore the blue shirt, so we're all good to go. Couple housekeeping notes before we go on. As of right now, episode 400, our big 400th episode, is not quite out yet. It's really close. It'll be out within the next hour or so. Just kind of some background bits that not any of you care about, all that. But a couple of weeks ago, I changed users. I switched profiles on my main machine here. So this is the one that we do the podcast on. It's the one that I work on. It's my daily driver. And I changed profiles. So I used to log into it with just my Microsoft profile, which was like an Outlook.com or Hotmail account, whatever. But I switched and started logging in as a domain member because I've got a domain at home. We all have Windows domains at home, don't we? I don't think I'm alone here. But I lost a bunch of my profile, a finely cultivated profile that I've spent years and years crafting to exactly the way that I wanted it. When I switched over and started logging in as my domain user, I lost all of that. And so because of that, a bunch of my PowerShell and stuff, I had done a couple of bad things. I had hard-coded a couple of locations that are not correct now in my profile. So I fixed those, but just spent some time fixing those things. So I think that's all fixed now. So I just need to go back and button up that podcast. So it's out on YouTube, but it is not out on the RSS feed. I haven't blogged it yet, but by the time this one gets done, for sure it'll be out there. So I appreciate your patience on that. But it has made me find. I only found one spot in my actual PowerShell functions where I'd hard-coded an address, but other than that, everything was fine. Just some weird profile things. I had some stored credentials in my other profile that I didn't have in this one. I had to recreate those. Just kind of baby steps. But it was a good learning experience. Shane and I talk about how, PowerShell, you have to be adept at PowerShell. You have to be a master at PowerShell really to do SharePoint or Office 365 or anything in the Microsoft landscape these days. And this is one of those things where I try to be the tool maker, even though I'm the only tool user right now. And I took some shortcuts when I made my tools, and they bit me when I changed profiles. But I learned a bunch of things, put a bunch of ifs and tries. So when my code goes out and tries to pull in a stored credential, if it's not there, instead of just failing miserably like it does or like it did a week ago, now it comes back and says couldn't find it. Things like that. So it's a little better. But that's why 400 is not out yet. And in the chat room, they're saying, I am the tool maker. I am not the tool itself. That's an old reference to a SharePoint conference gag that happened a few years ago. But I am the tool maker now. I make the tools. Topics this week. So one of the things that I've been doing, I've got a couple of really intense customer gigs going on right now, and they've been a little bit outside of my comfort zone, which has been terrifying and exciting all at the same time. They have both been 100% Office 365 centric. There has been no on-prem SharePoint with either of these two gigs, and it has been refreshing. A little scary, not quite my comfort zone, but really good stuff. And one of the things that I've had to embrace a bunch is Teams. Now, you don't have to listen to this podcast very long to know how Shane and I feel about Teams. And that is, it's been out for a while, and it's just not quite ready for prime time, in my opinion, in a couple of areas. But this customer that I'm working with, they wanted to do some things with Teams, and so we're doing some things with Teams, and it's worked out. It's been better than I expected. One of the things that I just have a tough time getting used to, I've been in this industry, over 20 years, is that things are being rapidly improved. And so some of the problems that I had with Teams 3 months ago, 6 months ago, a year ago, that were legitimate problems have been fixed since I tried them last. So I just have to continue to remind myself that that is a potential thing. And so I've been using Teams. I've got have had some successes with that. But one of the things that I'm doing now is I'm going to be delivering some training for one of these customers. And I'm here in Iowa, and they sadly are not here in Iowa, which is their loss. I mean, they're in a very beautiful part of the world. It's very nice. I've been there. It's very, but Iowa's got some stuff. You know, the fall's coming, the leaves are changing. Very, very picturesque. But they're having me deliver some training remotely, and they said, hey, we should do this with Teams. And I said, what? And I bite my tongue. And okay, let's find a way to do this with Teams. And Teams in July, I believe, released the ability. So you've always been able to do meetings with Teams. So a bunch of peers getting together and equally sharing the screen with video and all that. In July, the Teams team announced live events, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's an event where one person is the focus. There is a presenter, and so their video takes precedence over the other ones. It was exactly the thing that we needed for this event. Now, I think it is technically in beta right now, but the customer wanted to give that a shot. Wanted to see how it works. So I've spent some time working with that. And I will say, with a couple of rough edges, the things that can be dealt with, it is a pretty good platform for presentations. Now, I will say it is not along the lines of something like Zoom or GoToMeeting, in that Office 365 as a whole, and Teams is no exception at all, is very much focused on internal collaboration, organizational collaboration. So we're going to talk about this in a minute. So while some of the things work outside of your organization, for the best experience, if everybody's internal, that's what you're going to get. And for this particular thing, it is not, because I am not on this customer's Office 365 tenant. I am on my own tenant. And so there's a bunch of guest things and federated things and stuff we can do. But as an external person to their tenant, I don't have the same experience that they do. And so we've gotten to fight through some of that. One of the things was being able to invite somebody. So by default, Teams only allows you to invite people inside of your organization, only lets you let people in that are part of your organization. And you have to go in and specifically say anybody can get in or everyone can get in, which is what I want, because I am in my tenant. I want to broadcast it to a bunch of people in their tenant. So I'm like, yep, this is the thing that we want. And in the show notes, there'll be a link to the announcement on live events in Teams meetings, Teams. But then there's also like an IT Pro backend. Here's how the sausage is made, which is, of course, my favorite of the two blog posts is the one. And there it is, glorious PowerShell. And so to enable the thing that I wanted to do, a couple of things that we wanted to do, we had to do that. So one of the things that we wanted to enable was the ability to record this training. And that is something that is controllable by the presenter, but it also has to be allowed by the tenant admin. By default, I believe that's turned on, so I didn't have to tweak that. One of the things that we were curious about was automatic transcription. That seems to be in there. I believe I've turned that on, but I don't see it in the interface yet. And then this ability to broadcast to everyone outside of your organization. And to tweak all of those settings, as is often the case with Office 365, we have to do it, or we get to do it, with PowerShell. And so I'm like, this is my jam. I love me some PowerShell. Let's make this happen. And this is a really ugly story about PowerShell. And so I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about this, because it's something that we're all going to run into as Teams begins to mature or continues to mature and begins to become a more important part of what we do in Office 365. Teams is very much the next generation of Skype for Business, which was the next generation of Link, which was the next generation of communication server. There's just, I mean, it grew out of an IIS app 15, 20 years ago that allowed, instant messaging. And so there's just a whole series of names. And so to change these settings in Teams, you need to install the Skype for Business PowerShell module. And in the Skype for Business PowerShell module, all of the commandlets that you use will reference communication server. So what you end up using is commandlets that reference a product 2 versions back from the one that you're actually working on, which is Teams. It is a huge mess. And that PowerShell module is just not deployed and used the same way that SharePoint on-prem is, that SharePoint Online is, that the PnP PowerShell is, that any of the other ones are. It's similar to Exchange, but still pretty rough around the edges. So I think probably today, once the anger has gotten out of my system, I'll probably write a blog post on how to do that, because it is just not intuitive. And if somebody wants to make that one setting, so if somebody's fresh to this, they see this blog post and they're like, hey, I would love to do my live presentation in Teams. I think that's a great idea, but I want to invite somebody from outside my tenant. I just need to tweak this one PowerShell value. That's probably a 45-minute task if you've never done any of this before, because just getting all the pieces and like there's a reboot involved. Why is there on the client? Obviously, because there's no. So I'll probably blog that today because it has just been. It took me longer than it should have taken me. I was a little embarrassed, but I took good notes. Thank goodness for the PowerShell transcription and get history. I was able to go through and get it all down. So I've got the shell of the blog post. I will probably blog that yet today. But after I got that done, I was able to create the presentation in Teams. The other person was able to sign in. It recorded it. It did pretty much exactly what we want to do. So we're going to try it out again this afternoon and test it. But it's been pretty good. So I guess part of this is Teams is still kind of a stinker. I'm not done maligning Teams just yet. But if you haven't looked at Teams or had a problem with Teams, a few months ago, give it another shot. See if it still has that same deficiency, because it's gotten better. I was pleasantly surprised. So I mentioned that Teams was kind of a mess and kind of trouble to use. I do want to mention something that is not a mess and something that is not trouble to use, and that is one of our new sponsors, AppRiver. So AppRiver joined sponsorship the last episode. We're glad to have them along. AppRiver is a company that I've been aware of and dealing with forever. I think the first time I dealt with them was 15 years ago. They had some appliances that helped speed up SharePoint across WAN links. It was a big hit with the people that I set it up for. And so I was pretty excited when they reached out to us and said that they wanted to advertise on the show. And one of the things that really made it appealing to me was their business is big and it's evolved with the times. They've been very, very nimble with that. But our audience is a lot of consultants, SharePoint consultants, Office 365 consultants, and that was the audience that AppRiver wanted to talk to. And so the service that they've got is for Office 365 consultants, folks like myself, that want to offer Office 365 to their customers. There's the CSP program and all those kind of things. You can now go through AppRiver to do that. And they provide extra services and extra support and just make for a much better experience for you and a much better experience for your customer, and kind of everybody wins. So if you are a Office 365 consultant, whether it be your emphasis is on Exchange or SharePoint or Teams or any of that, and you're thinking about reselling Office 365 to some of your customers and kind of making packages and bundles for them, I urge you to go to appriver.com, check them out, and see if that's something that you want to add to your arsenal. They've got a great reseller program. I highly recommend it. And thanks to the folks at AppRiver. Continuing in our theme of PowerShell and Office 365, one of the sessions that Shane and I did at SP TechCon, and honestly a session that I do a lot at conferences, is how to use PowerShell with Office 365 as an administrator. And that has been a topic that has improved so much in the last 4 or 5 years. The Office 365 and PowerShell story has gotten so much better than the first time I did it. But one of the indispensable tools is the PnP, the Patterns and Practices PowerShell. And you can get that, it's out on GitHub, and I don't have the link in the show notes, but I'll put it below where you can download that. It is in the PowerShell gallery. You can pull it down. Anybody uses the PnP PowerShell. It is just the way to go. So at both of my customer sites, one of them, I'm a little deeper in the IT part of the process to rolling it out. But there's just been a bunch of things. We're whiteboarding and we're trying to figure out what we want to do and knobs we want to twist and all that kind of stuff. And so the higher level business people will be, well, is there a way to do this? Is there a way to automate this? Is there a way to mass roll this out? And every time I'm like, I'm pretty sure PnP can do it. And I think for the most part that has been the case. So the PnP has not let me down. When I do this talk, I get a lot of feedback because a lot of people need to haven't been exposed to it, and it's kind of scary. The PnP project in its whole is a developer thing. It's the developer patterns and practices. And so they're a little scared off by it. And so there's a nurturing process. There's things like that. I get a lot of questions about that. But then one of the pieces of feedback I got a year or so ago when I did it was the person in my class was very into the PnP, very into PowerShell with Office 365. They'd done a bunch of things, but they said that they wanted to use the PnP PowerShell, but their boss or their company wouldn't let them use it because it wasn't an official Microsoft thing like the SPO commandlets or the Azure AD commandlets, things like that. And so I said, well, that's not the first time I've heard that, and that's reasonable. That happens all the time. And so a month or two later, I was over, I think it was in Sweden at a conference speaking, and the godfather of the PnP, Erwin, was there, and him and I were chatting, catching up, and I told him about this. And I think I mentioned it last week. Erwin's a very level-headed, staid kind of guy, but he was like, I could tell that was one of those things that really grinded his gears. And so he kind of went off on all the reasons why that was ridiculous, and I was just feverishly writing things down. And that ended up being a slide in this deck that I do. And so Shane and I did it at SP TechCon here a couple of weeks ago, and he thought it would be a good enough topic for the podcast. So I thought I would go through some of these reasons why the PnP PowerShell is just something that you have to be comfortable with and something to talk to your boss about. So the first, the big thing is, especially in big companies, they really want something that can be supported. So they will only want to use things that are approved by Microsoft, official things. And I guess probably the biggest thing to take away from this is the PnP PowerShell is absolutely, positively, 100%, undeniably supported by Microsoft, for sure with a little s. You can't call Microsoft tech support if you have a problem like you can with Windows, but Microsoft knows about the PnP. They help tremendously. It is a thing. It is a valid thing. We know this for a few reasons. Number one, Vesa Juvonen, who is a senior program manager at Microsoft for SharePoint engineering, he is one of the main project owners. So he is deep in it. He does PnP talks all the time. Nothing is going on in that project without Vesa's approval. And Vesa is whip smart and nothing gets past him. The fact that Vesa is involved for me, and having known Vesa as many years as I have, the fact that he's involved, I wouldn't need anything else. If Vesa says it's good, it's good. The other thing is that so it's a module that you download and it's got to be signed and all those kind of things. Microsoft started signing it with their own key about a year ago. So before that, it was signed with its own key, but Microsoft said, this is an official thing. We're going to sign it with Microsoft's key. They would not do that for something that I wrote. They would not do that. So, it is a legitimate Microsoft thing. Another thing that's interesting about it is you can get it from the PowerShell gallery, which is part of PowerShell 5 up and 5.0 and up. And so one of the things was a customer mentioned that it was not safe. They didn't trust things like that. And Erwin said, well, it is given the same sort of scanning and the same sort of approval as any other thing in the PowerShell gallery, and that is exactly none. So if you get anything from the PowerShell gallery, this is at least as safe, probably safer than that. It's very safe. And Erwin himself works at Rencor, which is a company whose sole purpose is to go through SharePoint code and fix it and make it more safe and more secure and more efficient. And so the fact that he's the guy working on the code, it's great stuff. So in the background, the PnP uses CSOM, the client-side object model. So it is basically just web calls. It's using the same routines that web parts use, that any kind of compiled code use. It's all the same stuff. There's no tricks or anything like that. There have been a couple of exceptions that they have needed, basically around security and authentication, because it is also open source, so you can see the code. So there have been a couple of occasions where they've had to do something to obfuscate some security things, but all of those things were approved by SharePoint engineering. Again, Vesa's on the case, so it's good like that. It's also completely security trimmed. Again, since it's using the same calls as web parts and all that, there's no sneaky ways around security or anything like that. It doesn't open any of that up at all. And one of the things that I liked about it that everyone was particularly proud of, and this stat was a year ago, so I'm sure that it's more, but he said that the PnP PowerShell hits the Office 365 API, so running commandlets and all that stuff. That happens over 1 billion times a month. So it's not like some little niche project that 4 people in Europe are using, or me and Shane and like 2 of our friends. This thing is huge. It is a well-used, well-tested set of things. So definitely keep that in mind. In the chat room, Mark Chrisman asks a really good question. He says, do you still need to be a SharePoint administrator in Office 365 to use the SPO PowerShell effectively? So the SPO PowerShell is the commandlets, the SharePoint Online commandlets that Microsoft puts out. They publish once a month or so. Yes, you do. And that is an important benefit of the PnP. So the SPO commandlets that Microsoft puts out are very much scoped at the tenant level, and they are for SharePoint administrators. You need to have that role or tenant admin in Office 365 to do anything, because it is at the tenant level. It is a high level, so it's tenant settings and things like that. So obviously, that doesn't scale very well. You don't want to have a bunch of those in your organization. The PnP, on the other hand, since it uses CSOM, since it uses the same code as web parts, any user can use it. Anybody can connect with the PnP from any machine, from their workspace, from their laptop, from any place that they could hit Office 365 in the browser. They can use the PnP PowerShell, and now you have more fine-grained security. You can delegate things. You can write scripts. You can create tools that site collection administrators can run, knowing full well that they can't do anything outside of whatever their domain, their realm is. Because it is scoped at the user level, not at the site collection administrator level. Another thing that Mark brings up, and this is the voice of experience. I have experienced this myself. He said, since the PnP uses CSOM, when you start pulling objects, lists, and webs and that kind of stuff, it only pulls the object elements, the members that you specify, instead of having them all available to you, which is what we're used to, especially since for SharePoint Online. And yes, that is the case. So what you cannot do is you can't do, get PnP web and then pipe it through select star and get all the attributes for it, because it's going to give you a little red error and say that all of those things haven't been loaded. So it is a little different. You have to remember that in the background, it is all web queries and web execution things. So it does take a little bit of rejiggering of your code. But honestly, it's not too much to work around. The first 2 or 3 times you stumble across this, it's tricky. But then after you start figuring out, here's a way to pull down all the elements. In most cases, that comes up when I'm tinkering, when I'm trying to figure out how to do something, when I'm looking for a particular property of a particular object and kind of poking around to see how to change something. That's when I get this error. It's not that I get this error when I'm writing code or writing PowerShell that does something. It's never going to show up in user space. It's always going to show up in the tinkering space. So it's navigable. Not the most convenient, but certainly easy to get around. Looking at some of the other notes in there. So Mark brings up the include parameter when you're doing the gets. So that's it. So just some great stuff. So if you haven't downloaded the PnP PowerShell, do that. There'll be a link in the show notes. Know that you can do it safely, and it's just the way to open up the next level of PowerShell in SharePoint Online, and honestly, a lot of Office 365. And I'm doing a big migration rollout for a customer, and if it weren't for the PnP, I don't know that we would be able to do anything. So it's a pretty helpful little tool, and I just wanted to kind of bring that up in case any of you are walking through the same quagmire that this person I talked to a year ago was. And if you need, I'll write you a note you can give to your boss. I'll probably get Vesa or Irwin to write you a note. It's good stuff, and I'm glad to see in the chat room that some of you guys have been using it. That's very, very heartening, because it's. I remember the first time I stumbled across it, I'm like, oh my God, where has this been all my life? This is life changing. Another thing that I wanted to talk about today. So yesterday was Patch Tuesday. I'm in the process of updating the patches on the SharePoint patch page. By the time this gets out, they'll be out there. So you can go to toddclint.com. Then across the top, you've got the SharePoint 2016 builds and the SharePoint 2013 builds in 2010. Those all came out yesterday. So you can check those out for the September 2018 builds. But also all of the Microsoft products got this. And so I've been just having Windows updates everywhere between the monthly update that came out with patches and security fixes and all that. There is I think a first ring build that's going out. I swear to God, every time I walk into a room and there is a Windows machine, it is either rebooting or it has rebooted, or every time I log in, I unlock a Windows machine and log in, it's the whole, hello, I've been upgraded. This may take a few minutes. Perhaps go make some coffee or take a walk around the block or, drive to a neighboring town and get some lunch. So that has been just maddening. So I guess my advice to you is if you've got some time, just go out and log into every Windows server you've got and every Windows client device that you've got and log into those and just get that process started because it will happen at the most inconvenient time. I've just been hit everywhere. I logged into this machine this morning. Everything was... So I'm like, I had to open up Chrome. I had a bunch of tabs open. It's better, applications remembering what you had open is better than it's ever been. We're in a much better spot than before. But man, is it a pain. Mark's asking in the chat room. He said he was looking at some of the regression pages the regressions on my patch pages, and he's asking, have the incidence of regressions fallen off? So that's a very astute observation of yours, Mark. So first off, in the software world, a regression is something that used to work that doesn't now. It had, the functionality has regressed, and that usually comes in the form of, they fix a patch, they send out a patch that fixes a problem, and that fix causes 3 other problems that you didn't have before that. Regressions used to be comically a huge problem years ago with SharePoint patches. 2 things have made that, maybe 3 things have made that less. Mark is astonished that he's been described as astute. Maybe that word doesn't mean what I think it means. Who knows? I don't have my word of the day desk calendar here this year. I think 3 things are probably helping with that. Number 1 is SharePoint 2010 and SharePoint 2013 are now sustaining engineering, so they're really only getting patches for big things. And so the fewer things that are getting patched and the fine focus of the things that are getting patched lends itself to fewer regressions. So that's working in our favor. The second thing is Microsoft changed the way that SharePoint 2016 patches. There's some under the cover stuff that also lends itself well to fewer regressions in 2016. And 2016 has been out for a couple of years now, and there has been surprisingly few legitimate regressions, like big things. It has been amazing how well they've done. So that's another piece of it. And number 3, there is just fewer on-prem installations. So there are fewer people noticing regressions and fewer people reporting them to me. So that's probably the 3 reasons that there's just not as many out there. But I'm still, every month I've got one of each, 2010, 2013, 2016, put the patch on, see what happens. I don't use all of those farms in production, so I'm not going to catch a lot of things, but I'm going to catch big things, I suppose. But those will be going out. And on-prem's not going anywhere. Obviously, SharePoint 2019 is still in the public preview. There's some things going out with that. So us on-prem folks are we've got some time. We've got some time to get up to speed on Office 365 before all the on-prem stuff goes away. But definitely updates everywhere. The Office client, the Office servers, Windows. I think my toaster had a patch. I had to reboot it this morning before I could make breakfast. Ooh, it has been a pain. Okay, so let's talk community stuff for a little bit. There's a SharePoint Saturday in New England, and that is just a month away, October 20th of 2018 in Burlington, Massachusetts. If you would like to sign up for that, by all means, go out to spsnewengland.org all of the cool domains end in .org, and sign up for that. I've been to that one before. It is beautiful. You can't beat New England in the fall. It's a really great place. Wish I could go this time, but I've got some prior commitments that keep me from doing that. So I will not be there. But I guess another thing is, if you are a community organizer of some variety and you've got a community event going, give me a shout out. I'm at Todd Clint on Twitter, todd@toddclint.com with email. Let me know and we'll give you a shout out here. Whether we're going to be there or not, we would like to get that up and going. Speaking of things we will be doing, we've got some self-promotion stuff going on. I've got a couple of things in the works right now that I don't want to announce here because they haven't been announced at the whole, but I've got a local event going on that will be sometime next month. So when that has been officially announced, I will announce that here, hopefully in the next week or so. And that's all because I haven't gotten them stuff. They are well ahead. They're all waiting on me. It's a horribly embarrassing thing. And then hoping to plan something with the SysKit folks, a live webinar, something SharePoint 2019-ish looking. So we're finalizing the details on that, but that'll be a live webinar for free, me, inviting me into your home sort of thing. So hopefully look out for that. I'll blog that stuff, toddclint.com/blog, when those two things come out. And then finally, December 4th and 5th, and man, December is only just a couple of months away. I will be at the Thrive Conference in beautiful Ljubljana, Slovenia, and I'm just proud of the fact that I can roll Ljubljana, Slovenia off of my lips. I've been practicing it for years. So this will be the third or fourth time that I've been to Slovenia, and it is just a beautiful place. I know I've got some European listeners. If you're going to be around in Europe and looking to burn some end-of-the-year training money, go to the Thrive Conference. It's a great conference. I'll also be doing an all-day session on administration the day beforehand. I think that's on the 3rd. You can go to thriveconf.com and find out about that. And that'll be a good time. And I'm bringing Robbie, my buddy over there, bringing in. We're going to be tag teaming on that day, that early day. And that's been fun because I get a very siloed view of how people use SharePoint, how people use Office 365. And it is always good to get somebody else's view. And in this context, it's always good to get somebody else's view locally. So Robbie, I mean, he's got his fingers in everything over there in Eastern Europe and Slovenia and Croatia and that area. And so there have been times when him and I have been chatting about stuff and he'll be like, yeah, everybody uses this or nobody uses that. And I'm like, that is crazy. I would have never thought to cover that because I just don't see that. But so for the European folks, come join over there. They've got some great stuff going on. Branka, the woman who puts this on, just does a tremendous thing. We're kind of talking in the chat room here about putting on SharePoint Saturday events and things like that. In all of the community things that I've done, I have never organized even a SharePoint Saturday event. And so we're talking about something that's 8 or 9 hours long. I have never organized anything like that. The amount of work that it takes to do that just seems insurmountable. And then I look at the things that like Branka has put on for the Thrive Conference. She's been doing this for years, and it is a many-day thing, and it is for speakers and attendees all over Europe and all over the world, and she pulls it off, and it has always been, and it's just amazing to me that even happens, that people can do that, but it has always been such an amazing event. I actually started talking to her a couple of years before I was able to attend my first Thrive event because I wanted to get over there so badly. I'd heard so many great things about that area of the world. I'd visited it once, but not gotten to spend a lot of time there. But then had heard so many great things about her conference and how good of a job she did. And it was all earned. I had a wonderful time, and I just can't even imagine not going if I get the invitation. So if you get a chance, go to thriveconf.com and sign up for that. It's a great time. Beautiful part of the country. Very gracious hosts. I cannot wait to see them again. So I believe I've taken enough of your time today. Chat room, I will be sticking around for a little bit. Next week, I believe Shane will be back. I believe I will be back. I think we'll all be here next week. Lori's even gone this week. Everybody's doing fun, exciting stuff. But I get to hang out with you guys, so their loss. But we will see you next week for number 402. And as always, you can look me up, website at toddclint.com, email todd@toddclint.com, Twitter @toddclint, things like that. I would love to hear from you. And I will see you next week.